prayer of the masses. I was very privileged this afternoon to go to the public prayer at the Kosel for the hostages and victory in Gaza. The whole plaza was full. Up the stairs was full, elbow to elbow. You couldn't possibly, we almost couldn't move. It was absolutely packed with all different kinds of people. Someone predicted to me that most of the people who come were women. It was not true. Maybe it was 50-50. I didn't see the women's side, but it was packed with men. It was organized by many Sephardi Rabbanim. It was the Yom Kippur Katan service as done by the Sephardim, and we as Ashkenazim joined in. Beautiful, heartfelt, as my Rebbe tells me, that the Sephardim, their piyutim are meaningful. You can understand them. They're not high poetry. Many Ashkenazi compositions are very, very difficult to understand. Here, the average person could understand every word. And that meant that everybody participated in a heartfelt way. And reminded of what the Arizal said, that prayer is as old as the Jewish nation. And just for those who need to know a little of the details, although you will read in Halacha that prayer 3 times a day is only something which was invented by Kanchi Knesset Gedola approximately 1,000 years after the Exodus, and that almost everyone holds that the prayer that we have, the fixed prayer that we have, is the Rabbanan. The Rambam seems to be the only one who says that once a day prayer is deraisa. All that having been said, everyone agrees that prayer in times of trouble is deraisa. So the idea that prayer was invented by the Anshe Knesset Gedola is simply not true. And Jews were in trouble a lot of times. So much so that at the Red Sea, with the Egyptians bearing down on them, Kosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, this is not a time for prayer. But he was praying. So, and Moses prayed for Miriam when she became leprous, and Yitzchak prayed for having a child with Rivka. And so prayer, even biblically mandated prayer, goes back to the giving of the Torah at Sinai. So prayer is simply, was institutionalized in a certain fashion by Anshe Knesset Gedola, and that's a long story which I'm not going to go into today. I've done it in my shiurim on prayer many times. And then the Arizal says that each shevet, each tribe, had its own siddur. So the idea that there are different Jewish groups that have slightly different orders of prayer. Maybe the differences are 5%, and 95% is in common. But that somehow creates some doubt and some worry, which is more authentic, and so forth and so on. The natural thing is to understand that Kosh Baruch Hu from the very beginning planned that different groups of Jews would have somewhat different prayers that they say. That doesn't threaten the unity of the Jewish people, or at least it shouldn't be thought to threaten it. And the reason is something which is a little subtle to understand, and that's what I would like to explain tonight. Probably everyone who's listening to this knows the story of Jacob, who had the dream of the ladder, and in arranging how to sleep, he took stones and put them around his head as a kind of barrier for animals, and in the morning it says he took the stone and anointed it with oil. So the commentators ask, what before when he went to sleep it was many stones, and when he wakes up it's one stone. And Rashi quotes the famous midrash that each of the stones competed for the privilege of being the resting place for Jacob's head. So Kosh Baruch Hu unified the stones. Now, the Bali Musar asks a question here, which at first glance may be difficult to relate to. How did Hakadosh Baruch Hu unify them as stones? And they offer two models. One model is to grind all the stones into powder and to mix them up and then create cement out of the powder. The other is to glue them to one another. So when you first hear that, you think, oh man, that's what's bothering them? I mean, that's what they spend their time on? What did he do with the stones to make them into one stone? But I think a little bit more deeply, the question that's being asked here is, how do you take different individuals, disparate individuals, and make them into a single integrated entity? And the two models ask the following question: is the only way to unify different people and to make them into a single integrated community to make them uniform, to obliterate their differences, to make them homogeneous? Is that the only way to do it? Grind them all up into powder, mix the powder, and then make it into cement, where every piece of cement is identical to every other piece of cement? Or is it possible to unify the people, make an integrated single entity out of them, preserving their individuality? When you take many stones and glue them together, this piece of lead and this piece of granite and this piece of sandstone, the lead remains lead and the granite remains granite, sandstone, and when you see the glued together conglomerate, you can pick them out. They still have their separate physical properties. It's just that now they're all one stone with a granite part and a sandstone part and a lead part. So what changes is the relationship between the disparate individuals, but not by obliterating their individuality. Yeah.
You're talking about the individual being, and how do you unify them? But people also have output into the world. So for example, a married couple has a baby, or two people build a business. So they're unified by their output, not necessarily just their physical being. So how does that fit into the analogy with the rocks? Because rocks have no output. Rocks are just...
Oh, I didn't mean to take the direct analogy to the rocks at all. We don't glue people together.
What I mean is, if two people build a business, or if two people build something, it doesn't have to fit into one of those two paradigms that you mentioned, or could it be something new?
No, I think it could fit into one of the two paradigms, or could have a different type of construction. I'm not limiting it to two constructions. I have no idea how to put a limit on how many different possible constructions there are. But the difference between these two constructions is that in the one case you choose the unity, you achieve the unity by obliterating the differences between individuals. In the other case, you achieve the unity of a rock by gluing all the pieces together, and now they're all pieces of one rock. But when you talk about that and carryover for human beings, it's not going to be like gluing together. And having common projects can be a paradigm of, well, really of either sort. It could be a paradigm of either sort, depending on how you accomplish it. So let me give you some examples. Right? Let's suppose you have 80 people all playing the violin, all playing the same note on the same string. Man, that's going to be unified, all right? It's 80 repetitions of the same sound. When you hear it, you'll hear one note with 80 violins behind that note. That's a certain kind of unification. In a certain sense, we have an orchestra with 80 pieces which embody 25 different types of instruments. And they play a rich chord, not all the same sound. The unity is a richer kind of unity precisely because the elements are different and cooperating in producing a compound with different parts that's unified. Now, if music isn't your thing, let's imagine 11 people on a football field, all holding a ball and all throwing it to the same place. Okay, got 11 balls going to one place. Compare that with a football team. A football team executes a play. Of the 11 players, 2 are going downfield and 2 are going around the side as fake, and one is pretending to take the ball for a short run over here, and the quarterback is fading back to pass to them. The 11 people, because of the different roles that they're playing, can accomplish a certain end that 11 people throwing a ball to the same place can't accomplish. So it's the very fact that in a football team, they're playing different roles that makes the effect of their cooperation much more powerful. You take military forces. You have 2 million people in the military forces. Would you give each one of them a rifle and say shoot at the enemy? That would be colossally dumb. First of all, you want to have ground forces, and you want to have naval forces, you want to have air forces. And you want to have tanks, and you want to have supply chains, and you want to have information gathering vehicles, and you want to have attack helicopters. When you have that, and ships and submarines, you have a much richer effect on conquering an area, as we now are experiencing, than you do if you have everybody doing the same job. They're all cooperating in the same goal. Each one of the things that they do, the cooperations are coordinated. That's one of the things in these battles, the last few years, when it's called hybrid warfare, where you have ground forces, and then they see a superior ground force, they call it an airstrike or an artillery strike, and then they mop up with their ground forces. So the two of them working together have a much more powerful effect. So the idea of unifying through obliterating differences is something which reduces the power, the creativity, the generative capacity of your society. And this works in ideologies also. Communist movement, in particular the Soviet Union, had a policy of recreating mankind. They believed, they taught in their ideology, that you can pass on to your children acquired characteristics. This is what's called the biology of Lamarckian evolution, which was supposed to have been utterly refuted by Darwin, and in the last 20 years has made a comeback. Certain demonstrated instances of Lamarckian evolution, but they're not very widespread. For example, there are places in Europe which had a long period of serious food shortages, and the people who underwent those food shortages, their bodies responded in certain ways to deal with the fact that there was very little food available, and some of the responses were passed on to their children, even though the children weren't born into famine and never lived in a famine, but they had the same features in their bodies. So Lamarckian evolution isn't zero, but it isn't nearly what they thought. And so what they preached was, we're going to create socialist man. Yes, capitalism has created a type of man who's individualistic, who only wants for himself. Capitalism pretends that it's created an open market by which, even following your own selfish desires, you'll do something that's good for the community as a whole, because the way in which you satisfy your selfish desires to get rich is to create something that people buy. And people will buy it only if it's good for them. So in order to get rich, because you want to be rich, you got to create something that people will buy. And when you do that, you're creating something that's good for them. So the idea was of the open market takes different people with different desires and puts no limitations on their freedom, but the open market motivates them to do what's good for the community anyway. Okay, there are weaknesses in that idea, but the socialist idea was, no, you have to be dedicated to serving the community and not be out in it for yourself. And the capitalist response was, people are people. And the socialist response was, no, they aren't. People are what we make them. And if we enforce with a gun a socialist economy and socialist performance, because otherwise you'll get shot, the children will be born naturally socialist, naturally dedicated to it, because they'll acquire it from the behavior of their parents. And in order to promote that, they had to lie about what was being discovered in biology, and they hired a guy named Lysenko, you can look him up, Lysenko, who promoted false biological ideas to support the evolution of character through behavior. And that meant that the only way which they would tolerate unification was through identical ideas, identical political principles, identical values, identical hierarchy, identical priorities. Does that sound familiar? Is there a group today that's also promoting identity of political ideas, social ideas, moral ideas, tolerating no disagreement? That's something to keep in mind, to think about. So that's a very weak, poor type of integration. Allowing for differences of opinion, different ideas, and allowing them expression and an open discussion, of course, that opens up to if you have identity of purpose, if you have cooperation of efforts, it opens you up to a much more creative circumstance. Now, of course, there have to be limits. You don't want to have in your schools equal time for people who preach that the earth is flat. You don't want to have in your school equal time for drug salesmen. Your parents didn't tell you about selling drugs, did they? Let me tell you. See this gold pin? I'm a rich guy because I sell drugs. Take it under my life. Think about it. When you're 16, we'll hire you. If you come to us, you'll do well. I mean, you don't want that for children. You know how destructive drugs are. Even for the ones who make money, they're destructive, let alone for the ones who get trapped and eaten up by the system. So openness and diversity of opinion it's not without limits, but you have to set the limits in an intelligent way. And especially when you're dealing with ideas like are current in American politics today, where the ideas where this group is setting limits are unproven ideas. And the proof that they're unproven is that the people who believe these ideas just yell and scream and don't let you talk. If they were proven, they'd prevent the proofs, and then they would rejoice in the fact that people who like proofs will be on their side. When they have to scream and talk and shut you up, that means there aren't any proofs, and therefore they're just shutting you up. That's an intellectual impoverishment. It's of creating unity through identity rather than through the diversity from which creativity can come. I heard just now something which I didn't think about it. I have to think about it some more, but it's a very interesting idea. I heard it from Jordan Peterson. What's wrong with the managed economy? What's wrong with the managed economy is that the economy is a vastly complicated system, and you have a few hundred bureaucrats who are running the economy. When you have an open market, you're crowdsourcing the analysis of the relationships to the entire population. Each person makes his decisions about what he wants to produce and what he wants to consume, and the sum total of that crowdsourced information and analysis gives you a gigantically richer grasp of what the market is, not in anyone's head, but in the collective operation and partial understanding of millions of people that you're going to have in a few hundred bureaucrats. That's one of the reasons why the open free market works much better than managed markets. It's a very interesting thought. It's all the same idea. Now, when you take a look at the way Judaism, the Torah society operates, we've drawn a line. There are certain things which we take to be proven by history, proven by experience, proven by our sources, and they are the limits of acceptable discussion, even though sometimes those limits themselves are under discussion. But if you have, let's say, an open area of 100 by 100, and the perimeter of discussion is 20 by 20, so it could really be sometimes leaking out to 23 or 24. But you're not going to have us talking about ideas that are 60 or 80 or 90 from the center, because they're regarded as ideas that have been absolutely demonstrated to be incorrect. But within the perimeter, the openness of discussion and the debate and the vigor of the debate and the independence of the debate is extreme, and it's one of the things when I was experimenting with Yiddishkeit, which impressed me as an intellectual, particularly as a philosopher, impressed me to a very great extent. You open up the Gemara, and first of all, there's a position, let's say, in a Mishnah or a Brisa, and then there are objections raised against the Mishnah. And then there are answers given by various, and sometimes later generations. And sometimes the end of the discussion is an objection is raised, and the last word is kasha, which means we don't have an answer. Here's the official text of the religion, which says there's an important position to which objections were raised, and no answer was given. So they didn't have an answer to those questions, and they publicized that. Well, what lesson do you learn from that? One thing is, asking questions is certainly permissible. Not only is it permissible, but you get credit for asking questions. Rabbi Akiva Eger's commentary in the Gemara, very often you have a piece of text, and he will cite another piece of text somewhere else, and he ends his comment with the letters Tari Ayin. Tari Ayin means Sorach Iyun, it needs analysis, and he doesn't give an answer. He's just pointing out that when you read this one, you read that one, they look contradictory. And as those who learn Gemara know, real trouble starts when he adds another letter. When he adds a gimel, that's Sorach Iyun Gottleib. These are not a thought. There's a really serious problem. Here's a lot of thought. Nobody read him out of the movement. Why are you disturbing the dogmatic slumber of the masses? On the contrary, he got tremendous credit for raising those questions. Even my own children, when we were living in Baltimore, my oldest was going to share some plata there. I guess he was 8. And he came home one day with a nickel. Now, this was the 70s, with a nickel could buy something. Well, how'd you get a nickel? He said, my Rabbi gave me a nickel. What for? For asking a question. What was the question? He told us, brilliant question. It's my son. You can read that as you like. I said to him, tremendous question. What was your Rebbe's answer? And he said, my Rebbe didn't have an answer. What's the message to the class? Stump the Rebbe is good business. You get a nickel if you stump the Rebbe. My second son was in Cheder up here on Cheskel. Can't think of what it's called. Maybe it'll come to me. One of the Zilberman Chadorim. And he was in kindergarten. And he came home one day and he was like, over the top. What happened? I asked the Rebbe a question. He called in 2 Rebbes who are adjacent to him, and they discussed the question in front of the class. Didn't have an answer. They called in the Menayel, the administrator of the school, and he didn't have an answer. And he did it in front of the class. You can imagine how he came. They didn't give him a nickel because this is Yerushalayim. They didn't have a nickel to give him. But he came home. It was his whole day. It was the whole week. He stumped all of them. So asking critical questions, not stupid questions, not stupid questions that are so far off the topic. I was once discussing something in Yiddishkeit with somebody. He said, yeah, but how do you know you're not sleeping all the time? I said, thank you for Descartes. But that wasn't what we were talking about. We were talking about, how you make buttermilk. Talking about how you're not sleeping all the time, it's for a different type of discussion. Not every question is relevant to every discussion. But within the parameters of what you're talking about, we had a pasuk in Tanakh the other day, and I objected to what all the other people were saying because it didn't make sense to me. I looked up in the commentators. It didn't say what any of us said. It said something else. Well, the word that we all thought was the subject of the sentence was the object of the sentence, and subject was something else. And then it made perfect sense. So I said, see, holding on to a question like that is worth it. Because if you are a straight thinker, 9 times out of 10, you'll find out someone great asked the question and gave a great answer. So when you talk about unity out of disparate elements, the intellectual unity is disparate elements are encouraged and reinforced. There's a international organization called Agudas Yisrael, Bond or Unified Israel, and it has in it leaders from various sections of Jewry. It's an Ashkenazi organization, but it has some Sephardim in there also, and some are Hasidic and some are Yeshivish. The Satmar Rav, stood apart from them and would not join them, though sometimes under the table he did help them. I know some cases myself. But publicly he didn't join them. And one of his reasons was you take decisions by vote. The only time we have national decisions by vote is when we have a Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin does vote, makes decisions, and the vote of the Sanhedrin is binding on the whole of the Jewish people. No other group has that power. No other group has that power. And if you are a group where you're not the Sanhedrin, but you're taking votes, and you expect all the members of the group to abide by the decision of the majority, even if the individual members disagree, you are pretending to have a Sanhedrin. And we think that that's inappropriate. We think you should wait for the Mashiach for the real Sanhedrin, instead of pretending to have a Sanhedrin. No one condemned him. No one condemned him for not joining Agudas Yisrael, because his principle is right. They felt that they could make decisions by majority vote and not fall trap into thinking of that false authority. But no one disagreed with him that nothing today can bind the individual to the group. And you have a person's minority of one, and he says, so what? I can be a minority of one. I can't be voted down. When there was a Sanhedrin, you weren't allowed to be a minority of one. That's because the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave it the authority. But the Sanhedrin had 71 people. I don't think you ever found, certainly a judicial court anywhere in the world had 71 people. And one of the things the Sanhedrin did was a judicial court. Maharal says there were so many people on it because people are different. And in order to have the best possible decision, the variety of human grasp and analysis and understanding should be expressed in the discussion. And then you take a vote. But you have to have it discussed. You have to have it on the table. So again, the unity is achieved through the inputs of vastly different points of view. So this is in the intellectual realm where this certainly takes place. I'm going to go other realms as well, but you have a question.
Could you say that voting falls under the mantra of Al Tifresh Min HaTzibur?
Which? Sorry, I didn't hear it.
In Pirkei Avos it says Al Tifresh Min HaTzibur. Could you say that even if voting is not binding in the sense of making this halacha binding, but it does show which way the community is heading, and then each individual has a responsibility to not separate from that community?
Yeah, no, I would not say that at all. I'll tell you why. Because Al Tifresh Min HaTzibur is not referring to the 1,000th of 1% of the population that's sitting on the Bezdin. It's referring to the rest of the population. There are 10,000 people in the city, and there are 23 people on the Bezdin. Al Tifresh Min HaTzibur means for the 9,983, not to the 23 who are sitting on the Bezdin. You're talking about the decisions of a Bezdin. That's what the Tzibur will do. And if the Bezdin is a Bezdin of a city, then the people in the city are bound to abide by the Bezdin of their city. Right? But Al Tifresh Min HaTzibur means don't separate yourself from the city. It's not talking about Bezdin. It could be indirect. If the city has a psak and you live there, you have to abide by the psak of the city. But it's not talking about psak. It's talking about the interaction with people, the communal institutions. If there's a community institution of tzedakah, you should be part of it. If it like the tefillah like it was there today, many people felt that was, I don't know how to count. Somebody told me if you fill the plaza up completely, it's 100,000 people. And it's a lot of people there. Okay, there are 700,000 people in Yerushalayim. Okay. Still, the idea of being part of the tzibur is part of the life of the tzibur. If there's a certain need for the tzibur, play your role in fulfilling the need. It's not just a question of psak. Yeah, there are rules for it. If you move to another city and there's one bezdin that runs the city, you have to take on their laws and their customs. You can't be a holdout against that. So that would be included in Al Tifresh Min HaTzibur, but it wouldn't exhaust Al Tifresh Min HaTzibur. It's not because it's about psak. It's about living together with the life of the tzibur.
But it's almost, you were talking about an intellectual unity. It kind of trickles down.
Yeah, but the unity is not unity of identity. That's what I'm saying. You make it sound like once they give up psak, everybody's going to think the same thing. That's not the unity I'm talking about. Right. I'm talking about unity where you recognize that people have different ideas, and yet you contribute them to a common goal,
It's the unity of outcome.
Yes, not unity of process. But the unity of outcome, again, can't be identity of ideas. That's not what's being. Even the Sanhedrin, if a psak is given, of course the person has to act on the psak and he has to teach the psak, but there's no reason for him not to think in 10 years they're going to raise it again. In the 10 years, the composition of the Sanhedrin will change, and we'll try it again and see if they'll get a different opinion. The Sanhedrin can disagree with prior decisions of the Sanhedrin, so nothing binding there. Yeah, right. So that's what, in fact, in Horius, they talk about a decision of the Sanhedrin, and one of them knows that they erred. So he didn't change his mind. And he was right. He knows that they're wrong. Now, if you ask, as you should, what do you mean he knows they're wrong? How could he know they're wrong? There's a majority of the Sanhedrin that voted against him. Maybe he's wrong. So I'll tell you how. I found one way. Some friend of mine thought of another one, which I don't remember at the moment. I'm partisan to my ideas. The Mishnah talks about, you'll know this, Mishnah talks about the two weavers who heard from Shmai Vavtalion, the teachers of Hillel and Shammai, heard from them a certain halacha. Hillel and Shammai later disagreed as to what the halacha should be. The two weavers said, both of you are wrong. We heard from your teachers this halacha. And Sanhedrin accepted them and ruled against both Hillel and Shammai in favor of Shmai Vavtalion. Okay, that's what the Mishnah says. Suppose there had been only one weaver. And he comes and he says, I know you're wrong because I heard from Shmai Vavtalion. They don't have to trust it.
It would be in a brisa then. I say half jestingly.
No, because when there were two, there wasn't a brisa.
If there was one witness, you said, and we weren't sure, they probably would have put it in the brisa.
Maybe so, but they wouldn't have.
Right.
They would have changed their mind. But he can say, I know you're wrong. Right. I know you're wrong because I heard from Shmai Vavtalion. It's not two that makes them right. It's the fact that they came from Shmai Vavtalion. So here, and they're not going to change their vote. But he can say, I know they're wrong. And under those conditions, he doesn't have to change his mind. He has to change what he teaches and change what he does, but he doesn't have to change his mind. So we're not talking about uniformity of minds. We're talking about uniformity of outcome in spite of the fact that the minds are different. That's the important difference there. It's the communists and those who I mentioned in America who are demanding uniformity of mind. They even penalize you for thinking the wrong thing. Okay.
Is Tifrosh Minasibur, that's Deraisa? It's in the Torah?
It's a Mishnah. I'll tell you, I'm not quite sure how to answer your question.
I'm just wondering where Menhagim come from. But that might be a...
Oh, no, that's not a Mishnah. That's not a minhag. That's not a minhag. I'll tell you, it's like this. First of all, Pirkei Avos, which is where this is, out of Shemot Tzibur. The first Mishnah, Pirkei Avos, is Moshe Kibul Torah from Sinai. Moshe got the Torah from Sinai and passed it down to Yoshua, and Yoshua to the Levim, and the Skenim, and so forth and so on. What's that doing in Pirkei Avos? The ethics of the fathers is sometimes translated as. If you thought this is Jewish folk wisdom, all nations have their wise people who create wise thoughts, and there's Jewish wise thoughts. Says the Bartanura, that's why the Mishnah starts with the Kabbalah Torah going back from Moshe to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at Sinai to tell you this is Torah. It's not Jewish wisdom that they thought up themselves. This is Torah. And it's based on the reception of the Torah from Moshe. And there's a proof of it. There's an absolute proof of it. I don't talk about absolute proofs. Those who know me, I rarely do. But here's a proof. Because one of the Mishnayos in Pirkei Avos says, Shmuel HaKatan Omer, Al ben polevech al tismach. Don't rejoice when your friend falls. But that's a verse. All the words that he said were a verse. So where's the folk wisdom here? What did he invent? He just said a verse from Mishlei. Thank you very much. So don't tell me it's Jewish originated folk wisdom. These are formulas that people lived by. And the idea is that you can build a whole life centered around a formula like this, which you might not have thought. You might not have thought that the formula is that rich and that multiply applicable. So that's what he's teaching you. So Al Tiferet Tzibur is going to be something that is borne out by the tradition that goes back to Moses at Sinai and its development. So now you say, well, is it the Rice or the Rabbanan? Well, there is one of the 613 commandments is to perfect your character traits. Rambam in Hilchos Deos, Mahu Afato. So if Al Tiferet Tzibur is part of that, then it will be in a derisa structure. Be in a derisa structure. That needs more work, but at least it's not ruled out. Okay, so that's intellectual character. Now, what about character? So it's an interesting thought that I have had, and I've asked Talmidei Chachamim, and they tend to agree with me. I didn't see it explicitly in other Sforim. Maybe I saw hints of it, but given that I spoke to good people about it, I'll share it with you. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had different fundamental character traits. This is famous. Avraham is chesed, loving kindness, and Yitzchak is gvura, which is strict accountability, strict justice, and Yaakov is some kind of amalgamation of them. What kind of amalgamation is bothered me for quite a while, and I had a bunch of models for it, mathematical models and logical models and chemical models and physical models, and none of them worked well. And I complained about this to my oldest son, and he said, Abba, it's a Torah idea, and you're using analogies from a different culture. Like, not surprising that they don't work, it's not coming from the same source. I said, that's a good point. What would you recommend? Now, he spent a lot of time and effort on Kabbalah, and he said, well, there's a concept of Or and Kli. Or and Kli means like this. And the Or, the light, is a certain idea, and a Kli is a vessel which holds the light, which therefore limits the light, but the light can also shine through the Kli, so it functions as a filter to the light. And the way in which they work together is multiple. One is that the light may be too bright to handle, like the Maharal's example of looking at the sun. If you look at the sun, you go blind. But if you take a piece of smoked glass and put it between you and the sun, then you can look straight at the sun in the smoked glass, and you can see it, and you can analyze it. So by putting up a filter that reduces the light, you get more light, not less light. Because the light is so bright that if you look at it directly, you just go blind. You won't get anything. So here you have hand in hand the idea of reduction for the sake of magnification. You reduce the power so that you can get more than you could get before. This is that idea. So now you have chesed, which is loving kindness, and you have strict accountability. Sometimes loving kindness, pure and full power, destroys the recipient. He becomes dependent. He becomes dependent for inaction, becomes dependent in thought, doesn't develop maturity and self-control. If the loving kindness is filtered through strict accountability, then it can give him a much greater benefit. So loving kindness is the ultimate motivation, and strict accountability is the way in which the loving kindness applies to get the maximum benefit. That, in that respect, strict accountability facilitates loving kindness. On the other hand, reciprocally, strict accountability isn't the purpose of creation. Because Baruch Hu did not start with the idea of strict accountability, of justice. The whole idea of creation is loving kindness. So if strict accountability were operating on its own, it would be a perversion. It would be destructive in a way that doesn't heal, doesn't promote the ultimate end. So when strict accountability offers itself to be a instrument in the hands of loving kindness, strict accountability is elevated beyond its own nature to serve something much higher than it. So the relationship of Or and Kli is mutually beneficial. They're more in the relationship than that, but that's the way in which it goes. Fine. So now you have Abraham is born, and by his life, he, so to speak, brings into the world the principle of loving kindness. Yitzchak is born, and he lives, and he brings into the world strict justice. Each one of them leads to excesses. Each one of them leads to excesses. Avraham was too favorable to Ishmael, and Yitzchak was too favorable to Esau. Their wives had to correct their stepping over the line. But now you have Yaakov. And Yaakov was the amalgam of those two features, uniting the Or and the Kli. That's why he's called Emes, that's why he's called Tiferes, that's why he's called Nora. Those terms describe aspects of this reality. So now I thought, okay, and he's the name of the nation. Yaakov's other name is Yisrael. We are all Yisrael. So here we are. We are supposed to be the synthesis of Or and Kli of Chesed and Tiferes. But the Sfarim don't say that. The Sfarim do not say that. The Sfarim say that every generation there are people who carry Abraham's stamp, and there are people who carry Yitzchak's stamp, and there are people who carry Yaakov's stamp. Why is that? Why aren't Abraham and Yitzchak's stamps redundant and passé, given that you have the combination of Yaakov, which is the perfect combination of the two? So I thought about it for a long time, and I came up with the following idea. What Hakadosh Baruch Hu wants is a continual process of amalgamating chesed and gvura, loving kindness and strict accountability, strict justice. He doesn't want to create the amalgamation that everything else should be a stamped version of the same thing. No. He wants representatives of Abraham in the generation and representatives of Yitzchak in the generation, and then a process of amalgamating them into the Yaakovs of the generation. Wow, that's an interesting idea. You have to have the three different characters together. Again, it's unification through binding the diversity together into a common whole that's richer than any one of the parts. Even one richer than the one part that embodies the two of them. And then I thought to myself, maybe that's why Yaakov lived to see both his father and grandfather, so that he could receive directly from each of them. Not that, let's say, Avram lived and died, and then Yitzchak lived, but then gave birth to Yaakov after Avram died. Okay, Avram lived, and he projected that quality into the world, and the quality was there. No, Yaakov knew both of them personally, and he received from both of them personally. So it was a living amalgamation. So to pattern yourself after Yaakov is not to pattern yourself after what he created. You pattern yourself after what he was creating. He was creating that amalgamation, and that's our job also, to create the amalgamation from the raw materials that exist in the generation. And that's why you'll hear people say that so-and-so was the Amud HaChesed, the pillar of Chesed in this generation, and someone else was the Amud of something else, because they were different. Then you have, for example, someone like the Kotzker Rebbe, who represented Emes in a certain sense, uncompromisingly, and in very extreme circumstances. The famous story is told that he had a chassid, he was a Rebbe, who came to him and said, Rebbe, I was on my deathbed, and I recovered, as you see, but while I was on my deathbed, I did not say Shema. And the Kotzker said to him, Yeshivat Ohr, because he meant I couldn't say it with perfect truth, perfect honesty, perfect wholehearted assert. Part of me was still rebelling. Part of me was still left outside. I couldn't say it. And the Kotzker said, Yeshivat Ohr, when the Maggid of Mezritch was dying, everybody was saying Tillim, the Kotzker stood there silent. That's extreme. It's very extreme. We need extremes. We need extremes on the periphery so as to keep the center from falling too far away. I'll give you another example. Rav Aaron Kotler, someone went to the yeshiva to visit and stayed overnight, and got up in the morning for davening. A lot of the Bachrim weren't there. So he was close to Rav Aaron, so during the day he said, I noticed a lot of the Bachrim weren't there for Shachris. So Rav Aaron said, yes, let me tell you why. Because this Bachar was learning downstairs, and he comes up to go to bed at 1:30. He's walking to his room, and the Bachar from down the hall says, what about Tosfos? The next thing the two of them know, it's 4:30. And now he tells us at the bed, you want him up for Shachris? As a matter of fact, being dead tired and sleeping through is considered onus. So that's something which in halakha is. So would you recommend that for every yeshiva in the world? No. But there has to be one place where learning is it. Learning is it. And when he says, what about Tosfos? The clock stops, time stops, daytime stops, nighttime stops, meals stop. And then 3 hours later, you're in bed at 4:30 a.m. and you're not getting up for 7:30 minutes. There has to be a place like that for learning to have the effect on the rest of the population who aren't going to go that far, but are going to be elevated in their learning by knowing that there is such an idea. So again, what's being projected is variety. There's a variety of ways to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a variety of emphases, and we need all of them. This is the idea of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael means the general Jewish people, and it has to be understood, be made up of different elements. This, my Rabbi Zatzal stressed very often with great love and great pain when it was violated. One of the popular expressions, which my Rebbe is speaking about all the time, that you hear from people, which is a terrible violation of this idea, is they aren't us. We're the in-group. We're the good guys. We're the superior guys. We have the emes. They don't have the emes. They aren't us. Is there room to draw a line? Sometimes, yes. But in the vast majority of cases when people say that, they're drawing the line in the wrong place. Drawing the line in the wrong place. You imagine a person who denies the oral tradition. The whole thing is not genuine. That's serious? That's pretty serious. Is that totally unacceptable? It's totally unacceptable. Now look at the Rambam in Hilchos Mamrim, Perek Beis, Halacha Beis, where he talks about the Karaites. What should you do about the Karaites? They denied the oral tradition. So he says, the originals who denied it and went off, they're criminals and they should be treated with great severity. Their children and grandchildren who were raised on their toes, on their mistake, they are ka'anusim, they're like people who have no choice in the matter and no responsibility in the matter, and you draw them to you with cords of love to bring them back to their Father in heaven. That's not, they're not us. It's not that attitude. They are us, and they're dreadfully disadvantaged, and they're to be understood as victims, and to be sympathized with, and to be related to with love. That's the idea of how far the disparate can go. It can go to people whose ideas are totally unacceptable, and still. And maybe this is also an illustration of the idea. You know that almost always, in a disagreement between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, we pass away Beis Hillel. So much so that the phraseology in the Gemara is, Beis Shammai ain't a Mishnah. Beis Shammai is not a Mishnah. That's applied in the following way. And the Gemara says, my opinion is not controversial. You won't find any controversy on my opinion. And someone says, no controversy, what do you mean? Here's a Mishnah where there's a disagreement about your opinion. And he says back, yeah, there's a disagreement, but the one who's against me is Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai ain't a Mishnah. Doesn't count as a controversy in the Mishnah. Even though they're recorded in the Mishnah, doesn't count as a controversy in the Mishnah, and I said it's uncontroversial, it's uncontroversial. Now, suppose you get up in the morning, and you make Birchas Torah, and you spend the whole day learning Beis Shammai. Is that a bracha levat Torah? Not at all. Ein Mishnah means it doesn't count for psak. Doesn't mean it doesn't count as Torah. It's definitely Torah. It being Torah is as much Torah as Beis Shammai, as Beis Hillel. It's just we don't pass it that way. That's again countenancing the difference. There's a whole parak in Edius where it records the opinions of individuals against whom the halacha was paskin. We don't paskin like them. The commentators ask, or I think ask, why are they recorded? So somebody mentions it, somebody won't say, oh, they didn't take that into account, or they didn't know about it, maybe you take it. No, they took it into account, and they voted it down. So you have to know that opinion is there, it's part of the tradition, But it was voted down in terms of what we should do. It's in the Mishnah. All the opinions are in the Mishnah. So this is the idea of the opposite of the melting pot. You know, the Havdol, people don't understand. In America, there's a slogan, E pluribus unum, which in English means out of many one. It doesn't mean the melting pot. When it was created, it meant a population dedicated to common goals, even though they represent different cultures, different ideas, different values. Even so, they're dedicated to a common goal. That's the kind of unity that we are looking for. That's the kind of unity that I saw at the Kosel Sefton. All different kinds of people, all saying the same words, all praying for the same ends, was absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
When it comes to hashkafa, where is that line drawn between acceptable variety versus, this is too far?
So it's very interesting, hashkafa. Maimonides says that someone who believes God is a body is an apikoros. Rabbi says he's wrong. So you have a machlokes there between the Rambam and the Rabbi, where to draw the line. Apikoros is something which is totally unacceptable, and they disagree on what counts as an apikoros. Even that can be debated. That's a halakhic decision where to draw the line. And just like you can disagree about other halakhas, you can disagree about that halakha as well.
But we would clearly say that the reform philosophy is wrong, right? So there is a...
There's no question that the hashkafa of the reform is wrong. Maybe it shouldn't be called hashkafa. It's not sophisticated enough to be called a philosophy. But that doesn't dictate how you treat them. They are still us because they don't know any better. They really are ignoramuses. First class ignoramuses. I was brought up reform, so I knew from the inside. First class ignoramuses.
I think the problem with the shir is that the people who need to hear it aren't going to listen enough.
But our attitude towards them can change. And that way it have a ripple effect. That's what I'm hoping for. Okay, good night, everybody.